All right, hello, welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you're watching this. My name is Elijah Jones, third year, studying secondary education, focusing in history, while also minoring in communication at Arizona State University. And this is my video essay for the cultural competency paper for BLE 220. I'm taking it currently in the spring 2023 semester at Arizona State University once again. Kind of as I was planning this video, a little bit of history, I guess. So I reached out to the professor, and I wanted to do something different. This topic of the video was very interesting to me. It was talking about a cultural competency, a piece of cultural competency that can be applied to the classroom. This is exactly why I got into education. Cultural competency is exactly why I got into education and how I knew that education was for me. So this project meant a lot to me. I really was invested in it as soon as I heard about it, and I knew that it was my goal to do the best I can on this assignment and do it in a way that I felt is applicable, engaging, and innovative and new at the end of the day. So thinking about all that, doing all the work, I've decided, I reached out to the professor, asked if I could do a research, a video essay, as opposed to research video, and amazing professor, Professor Shreya Bridges, and here we are. So this video, I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things, mainly relating to how Black students and Black educators exist in the education system, and what is the best route for them to really work under and exist under as we look at how education currently stands and sits. Before I go any further into the actual project itself and the actual research I've done, I first want to talk about how I was introduced to cultural competency at first. Funny enough, it was at a fraternity convention, Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. If anyone's curious, you can see it right back there. I was into the concept because there was a breakout session at the conference, and it was led by a professor at San Diego State University, a brother, and he was talking about this thing called cultural competency and everything that goes into it, and how it's all about finding ways to get students to understand, or teachers to understand who their students are. And at first I was like, well, I'm not too sure what cultural competency is. I've never heard of it. I just recently switched into education, but this sounded like a very interesting topic to me. So I went to the session, and this professor, the brother, he was talking a whole bunch about how education right now in the world is really shifting. In the past, for the past however many years, you've always seen the white students make up the majority of the education system. However, now we're approaching a time period and an era where that's not the case anymore. In fact, we're having about 50% of minority students and about 50% of white students in most school settings. Obviously, it's going to change depending on where you are in the world, where you are in the nation, but nationally in the US, that's what it's starting to look like. So it's very interesting to see this, very exciting, but at the same time, it's a little bit scary too. How it stands right now with teachers. First of all, there's a teacher shortage that everyone's aware about, and we need more teachers to really satisfy and properly serve these students. That said, even if you look at the current teachers that we have in the workforce, the issue is that some of these teachers are not understanding of the students they have in their classroom. A perfect thing is that when you look at how the teacher workforce looks right now, it's predominantly white women. And this is not a problem at all. However, it should be noticed and it should be noted that these white women make up the majority of the workforce, because right now, like I just said, we have about 50% of minority students. And when teachers can't relate to their students, there's a lot of negative consequences. First and foremost, the students don't learn as well. There's going to be a study that I'm going to be referencing later on, and another speaker who I'm going to be welcoming later on has found that students learn better from people who look like them. So that's a major thing. But even beyond that, if you look at the statistics as far as who's punished in schools, right now it's Black and brown, specifically Black and brown boys and young men, who are heavily represented in the punishment and in these situations where students are disciplined, and they're not disciplined appropriately. They're over disciplined, and it's gotten to the point where everyone knows it, everyone talks about it, but no one has provided any solutions. And with this project particularly, I wanted to focus on solutions, real solutions, applicable solutions, because in that convention, what I heard was that this is a problem that exists right now. Teachers do not understand their students, and because they don't understand their students are negatively facing consequences. They're constantly punished more often. They're not learning as well, and they just don't feel at home at school. Later on in this video essay, we're gonna hear exactly why that's such a problem. But what's extremely important to realize right now is that this is what was being said, and I've take it at face value. This is a professor. Obviously, he's done his research, but at first I was like, this makes a lot of sense to me, but I want to see it firsthand. Fast forward about a year, I'm doing my internship or less than a year actually, but I'm doing my internship, my first internship at a high school in Mesa. This high school predominantly white. After the white students, there's a lot of Hispanic students, and then it's left is just a remainder of Asian, Black, and other races represented. When I went to the school, I found it very interesting because even though it had a large amount of Hispanic students, in fact, every single class had about, I would say, probably a good 30% of the students in there, maybe a little bit more actually, were Hispanic. But every single teacher I saw, for the most part, except for the Spanish teacher, was a white teacher, white male, white female. Now, again, these teachers are doing amazing work. They're working very hard. I'm not trying to discredit them in any way. But from what I witnessed firsthand, it's clear that these students do not feel welcomed or understood or appreciated by their teachers. This is shown by how the students are never truly engaged in class. They don't ever look to sit in the front. They don't ever look to be extra engaged. Very rarely, I should specify. And from seeing this, is already disheartening. But on top of it, I was looking at how the teachers would work with the students, and there's a clear expectation, albeit unspoken, that these teachers do not necessarily expect the students to succeed, whether that's inherently done or if it's just something that's always been done. These teachers expect the students, the Black and brown students, to not perform as well. I've seen it firsthand, and there's also several studies that back up this fact. So when looking at this, when looking how students are represented in the classroom, I thought it was important to spend time and really ask the question, what is the best method? What is the best method of education for specifically Black students, for the purpose of this project, specifically Black students? And in doing this, I realized that there's a lot of different routes to actually teach students, and there's a lot of different ways to go about the education of Black and brown students. There's a public route, which is probably the most commonly done, because it's the most affordable, and in most states, not Arizona, actually, interesting enough, and I'll get to that in a second here, but most states is, you have the school borders, and if you live in a certain area, you have to go to a certain school, and typically those areas are underfunded. So the schools that have the most Black and brown students are typically the underfunded schools. And again, I'm going to talk about this in just a second here, but there's a public route, there's the private route, which is not often undertaken, but it's going to be a good education because it's privately funded, and there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. There's a charter route, and there's been a recent uptick of charters in the past couple of years, and this is schools privately owned but publicly funded to an extent. And most of the time, the public charter schools I'm referring to specifically are designed specifically for Black students. They mostly only admit Black students. A lot of the faculty and staff who work at the schools are Black, and it's all centered around properly giving a Black education to students who most likely would have not received it if they went to a public school. So looking at all these, and then on top of those, public, charter, private, there's also the kind of private sector, or the third party sector, as I'll refer to it throughout this video. And that's through a company that I actually have a lot of experience with. The Literacy Lab is a company that I work for right now, and we'll talk about that again later in the video. But was specifically referring to that video, or to those private or third party sectors. Those are people who are dedicated to teaching Black and brown youth and helping their education, but maybe not in the classroom. Before we go any further into the actual heart of the story and the heart of this video, which is talking with Black educators and hearing what their perspectives is, it's important to set the tone and to set a stage for what the problem is. There's a reason why I feel so passionate enough about Black students and their education to make a whole video about it. It's not just because they're being mistreated and misrepresented in education. Well, it is, but that's a broad level. That's a broad explanation of the topic. Because as it stands right now, the school system is not set up to provide a successful experience to students of color. This is showcased by several different facts, and I want to point out a few of them before I go any further. One is, as it stands right now, 1.6 million students attend a school with a sworn law enforcement officer, the SLEO, but not a school counselor. How does that make sense? It's clear that the schools with these SLEOs are the schools in the underfunded communities, the schools that are not getting enough money from their communities. And there's a lot of high risk in these situations. So obviously, it makes sense to put law enforcement in there to make sure the students are safe. Our number one job is to make sure the students are safe, and I understand that. However, the fact that they put a law enforcement officer before they put a school counselor into the environment, into the picture, is clearly demonstrating that there's not a high level of care and a high level of dedication to ensure that these students are prepared for success and are set up for success. Instead of setting them up for success by giving them a school counselor who can help them deal with their emotions, they are given law enforcement, people with guns, people with weapons, people who bring back a lot of trauma for Black and brown students, Black students especially. And by bringing this to the schools as opposed to mental health, it showcases that there's not necessarily a high level of attention and care towards the mental well-being of the students. Instead, it's more so towards a punishment style of a punishment-based approach. On top of the fact that there's not really the mental health support, I should say, or personal support. There's also stats that show that out of all the Black students who took the ACT in 2015, over 60% of them did not meet any of the college standards. This shows even more so that for a Black student to get to college, they have to beat the odds. For a Black student to get past high school, they have to beat the odds. And there's literal tests, the tests that showcase whether students are qualified or not for college, and Black students, over 60% of the Black students are failing them. These are stats that need to be told, these stats need to be understood, but simply explaining them to us in a classroom, teaching us different strategies is very helpful. These strategies need to be efficient, they need to be effective, they need to be effective right now. One thing about education, that education changes constantly, it shifts constantly. So this video, a main purpose and goal by we're talking to current educators, is to understand what are the effective ways we can make change right now. Because one thing that I've experienced in my time at ASU is that we talk a lot about cultural competency. We talk a lot about culturally responsive teaching. We even talk about critical race theory in some classes. But is the message always being told in a way that students can understand, in a way that college students specifically can understand? As we get into the interview part of this video, I wanted to take a second to really bring in everyone who I'm going to be talking to. We're going to be moving a little bit fast through these different cuts and their different stories. And I think that it's crucial that we hear who they are and where they come from and their perspective. It helps understand what they're saying. So one of the people I'm interviewing is Josh Good. Josh Good is a 9th grade English teacher at North High School, born and raised in Arizona. So he's experienced Arizona education as a Black student, and now he's experienced it as a teacher. He didn't always want to be a teacher, but he eventually found himself taught middle school for a little bit, and now he currently teaches high school, as I just said. One really cool thing about Josh, he actually teaches at the school he went to. He went to North as a high schooler, and now he's teaching there. However long later, he's back there teaching. Another person I interviewed was Dr. Quentin Boyce. Dr. Quentin Boyce is a former superintendent of the Roosevelt School District, which is a local school district in the South Phoenix community. He's also worked as a high school teacher, as a high school principal, and he also worked a lot with the Phoenix Union District as well. Currently, he works at Arizona State University, and he focuses on really connecting high schools to the university and finding ways to work with them. Looking outside of the classroom in the public sector is Erica James. So Erica James is a coaching specialist with the Literacy Lab. She has really another person who found their way into education in a more of an untraditional route. So is Dr. Boyce and the last guy. So all these are people who didn't initially want to be educators, but there was a calling and they found their way here. And now Coach Erica, as I call her, Coach Erica James. So she works at the Literacy Lab, and she also works with a tutoring company as well. So she has a lot of experience working with individual students as opposed to classroom. She does have experience in the classroom. This is just what she does right now, so she has some great perspective. And lastly, we have Mr. Ivan Douglas, who's the National Director of the Leading Men Fellowship for the Literacy Lab, which is a company that really specializes in tutoring, teaching, and supporting Black and brown students all across the world, all across the nation, I should specify. Mr. Douglas has a lot of insight and a lot of perspective. He actually initially was a lawyer. They found himself in a high school classroom focusing on mentorship. And then now he finds himself leading a whole fellowship dedicated to teaching young Black and brown boys and really a whole bunch of other students basic literacy skills that are going to help them is going to take them very far in their educational careers. These are real stories from real people. So, take them in, enjoy them. And I guess we'll just get right into it. So the first question that really I wanted to address when talking about when talking to these teachers was, what is the importance of Black educators? So we'll go ahead and get right into one of the interviews, and then we're going to talk a little bit about stuff we heard.
And you were kind of already answering a little bit of my next question, which is, what is the importance of Black educators?
Yeah, representation, absolutely. It matters, and there's been a lot of studies over the years that are coming out and really proving the point that students need to see themselves in the teachers. They perform better when they have at least one Black male in the classroom. The higher graduation rates, lower dropout rates, more likely to go to college, and all the statistics. We typically hear about, oh, if you're on grade level, what happens. But now the John Hopkins study is showing if you have at least one Black role model in the classroom, how you're 40% more likely. I believe they said 40% more likely to actually graduate from high school. So we're starting to see the numbers back up what we kind of knew anecdotally, because students want to see the different experiences. They want to know that they matter as a person, as an individual, and sometimes they need to see that in their teacher.
I think that the importance is first about representation. I think that one, it's hard to relate to something, a system, when you don't see anyone that looks like you. And I've actually had that experience also where I've been a child at a school where maybe there was one or two other Black students in the entire school and no Black staff members whatsoever. And so that representation really matters because it makes you feel that you have a place here. I think that there's a sense of belongingness. And so just being in that building to me is the first impact. And the second one, I think, is the cultural competency piece. You see and you hear a lot of stories about things that are misunderstood or misinterpreted, the things that are a part of Black culture, whether good or bad. They're just a part of the culture that may be misunderstood. And you have students that are penalized or punished in school for behaving in a way that's kind of culturally appropriate for them. When you have Black educators around, they're able to identify those things and say, hey, like, this is why this is happening. This is what they're used to. And then explaining to them, like, we have that twofold thing where we're able to explain, like, hey, and I'm thinking right now of like ebonics. So, hey, yeah, sure, go ahead and speak how you naturally speak. But when we're writing, we have to be able to code switch. We have to be able to also write in a way that is deemed academic.
Yep.
And so, but it doesn't invalidate the way that you speak naturally. You can still feel more than welcome to speak that way in those settings where that's most appropriate.
Was there always like a good level of connection and awareness when it came to specifically Black students, or was you just teaching students to teach students?
I was just teaching students to teach students. To be honest, it wasn't until maybe last year, like within my 6th year of teaching, I was working with my 7th and 8th graders, and there was a couple Black students that I did have, and the school was predominantly Hispanic. So, having Black faces in a predominantly Hispanic school, it was a little different and a little hard for them because they were hearing things like the N-word being used. They were hearing things about appearance, noses and facial features and things like that. And like saying it as jokes, but jokes have deeper meanings behind them, and deeper feelings and emotions. And so it just kind of didn't sit well with me in terms of like watching them have to struggle. So my focus then became, how am I going to make sure that these individuals, these Black boys that I'm working with and these Black girls that I was working with, have somebody to be safe with, have somebody that, is around. And that's where my shift kind of started to happen.
So you can see from the interviews we just had here, it's clear that Black educators are providing insight. They protect their students literally. They love their students. They can understand their students. I think a great point that Coach Erica brought up was the fact that as a Black teacher, there's certain things that you can communicate better than other teachers can. On top of that, you can't deny the stats that Mr. Douglas presented when he was talking about how simply having a Black role model makes a major difference in the likelihood of graduating. These are key things, and these are literal, physical, tangible pieces of evidence that show having a Black educator, it means a lot in the classroom. I say that, but you have to realize that it's not always possible to have a Black educator in the classroom. So part of this video is bringing these stories, listening to these stories, and telling why, and explaining why it's so important to have a Black educator as a young Black student. That being said, we need to understand that this is not always the scenario that's possible. So when we know this, it's a responsibility of us as future teachers, Black, white, Asian, whatever. We need to work extra hard to meet our students where they're at and understand them for who they are. Because looking at what Josh was saying, Mr. Good, he was speaking about how students were being made fun of in their own home, in their own school. And that's unacceptable. Obviously, they were blessed enough to have a Black teacher with them in the classroom, in the school, to, advocate for them and defend them whenever necessary. But that's not always possible. So it's not always possible in the sense of having that Black educator. Now, it is possible for teachers, aspiring teachers, future teachers, current teachers, retired teachers, or substitute teachers, whatever it is. It's extremely possible for them to be a voice for the voiceless, step up, let people know what's okay and what's not okay, and inform themselves. Talk to Black teachers, talk to Black students, understand who they are, understand where they come from, and recognize that even if you can't have a Black teacher in your school, even if you don't have a Black teacher in the classroom, there still are ways to find students where they're at, understand them, and work with them to be successful. These next few interviews, the question changes a little bit. Instead, I'm asking for specific ways that Black educators can support their own students. And we're going to go ahead and go straight with Mr. Good, because he has a beautiful story that I would love for all of you to hear.
I think having a Black educator is important because it just, we always say it's visibility, it's understanding that there is somebody in the classroom that at least understands me.
So as you can see, restart. So it seems that if there's two sides to what a Black teacher and a Black student face in the education system, we heard the beautiful story from Mr. Good about how by having a teacher, he was able to relate to them, understand, recognize the language, and feel heard, feel represented, see himself in the teacher. And that shows him that he can maybe be a teacher one day, he can maybe do something else completely different, but it's representation, it's a role model. And we've talked about the stats, we've heard stories. So you can tell there's a lot of impact that comes from having a Black teacher. On the other side of things, when you are that Black teacher, there's a bit of a burden. There's a bit of a burden that you have to bear. And that burden is the fact that anytime something happens, anytime there's some trouble, anytime a student has some issues with a Black student, you might get a knock on your door. And you might have people come to you asking for help, trying to figure out what to do. And while it's great to ask, and this whole video is encouraging you to ask and hear the stories, like Mr. Douglas said, there is a line that we need to draw as Black teachers. There's a line that Black teachers need to draw to illustrate and communicate what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Yes, it's important to advocate for Black students, and it's important to get perspective. If you are a teacher working with a Black student, I encourage you to get perspective. But be aware how you ask for that perspective, be aware how you approach that. It's important, especially for Black teachers, because teachers are stressed right now. It's a not a hidden fact, not a secret fact. Teachers are very stressed and they need help, but it's not going to help anyone if we're overworking the teachers who are in the lowest minority. So we need to understand that, yes, these Black teachers are there to support the students, and sometimes you might need to lean on them a little bit. That being said, it should not always be the same Black teachers you're leaning on. It should not always be the same people you're leaning on, regardless of race, regardless of sex, regardless of gender, whatever it is. You as a teacher, teachers in general, aspiring teachers, current teachers, whatever it is, need to work hard to educate themselves and do the extra steps so that they're not being a burden leaning on their other teachers who might relate to students a little bit more. It is a benefit to have a Black teacher in the classroom. It is a great benefit to have a Black teacher in a school on several different senses, one being the student side and also from the administrative side to get that perspective. However, they're a teacher at the end of the day. They already have so much burden and there's no need to put too much on them. But that's just a kind of a point of a larger issue, and that issue is, what is the best route for Black teachers and Black students to take? The whole purpose of this video and one of the key questions is looking at how education exists right now. Is the public route the best route, or is the private route the best route, or is it charter, or is it something completely different? What is the best way for a student to get the proper education? And obviously the way I'm addressing this question is by looking at how the teachers perceive it. How are the teachers and the educators right now, what their thoughts are? So this next section, we're going to take a few minutes and just hear from teachers, hear from these educators, hear from people I had an opportunity to speak with about what the best path looks like for teachers. And I asked them what the best path looks like for teachers because at the end of the day, if your teacher isn't happy where they are, they won't be as successful with their students. So I want to understand what the perspective is of teachers who are in the field, and get an idea of what it might look like to be in the field and what it might look like in the future with how we're existing right now. So take a moment and listen.
I remember my first Black teacher was Miss Harris. It was my 5th grade teacher. And that was like a pivotal moment for me because, I never had saw that. And when I first had her, she kind of like opened my eyes to certain things, certain lingo, the language she was using, like things that I hear back, with my family, or things that I'm hearing with friends. And So it just kind of was like, she understands me a little bit more than other teachers have.
And kind of thinking broadly, and obviously, we don't represent all the Black male teachers in the entire world, but I feel like we definitely have a unique role in two ways. One, we have to be an advocate, and that just means providing a voice for the students and being present. But then that also literally it means that sometimes other teachers will kind of not be knocking on your door when they have issues with students. So is that something that you face when you were in the classroom or even right now?
Absolutely. And it's funny you say advocate. I define myself as an advocate, and I did have the legal background, but I think I'm representing the voices of the people that I'm serving, right? Whether I'm in the classroom or out of the classroom, even at the literacy lab, the fellows, I think I'm an advocate for the voices of our fellows, because they are not quite in a position of power and influence yet, but they have so much voice, so much perspective that I want to make sure is actually being heard. And so that's definitely how I think I'm amplifying the voices of the people that I'm serving. And so in that instance, I am an advocate for them. But as a teacher, it was difficult because you're wearing many different hats as a teacher. You're educating them on a subject in the classroom, but you may be serving as a mentor, you may be serving as a counselor, an advisor. You're protecting them in many instances. But I never wanted to wear the hat of a disciplinarian. I didn't want to be the one that a principal felt like they had to come to break up a fight or to put somebody back in their place. Yeah. That's the temptation I think a lot of leaders have, is like, oh yeah, we'll let the Black person deal with the behavioral issues. No, I am an educator first. And so I think you have to really be careful about how you define yourself and what your role is when you're in career positions. And in the school context, I was very intentional with how I defined. I am an educator. I am not the disciplinarian, right? So don't send all your problems to me thinking that I can solve them. You as a teacher should be able to handle what happens in your classroom. Let me handle what happens in my classroom.
So it seems that if there's two sides to what a Black teacher and a Black student face in the education system. We heard the beautiful story from Mr. Good about how by having a teacher, he was able to relate to them, recognize the language, and feel heard, feel represented, see himself in the teacher. And that shows him that he can maybe be a teacher one day, he can maybe do something else completely different, but his representation, it's a role model. And we've talked about the stats, we've heard stories. So you can tell there's a lot of impact that comes from having a Black teacher. On the other side of things, when you are that Black teacher, there's a bit of a burden. There's a bit of a burden that you have to bear. And that burden is the fact that anytime something happens, anytime there's some trouble, anytime a student has some issues with a Black student, you might get a knock on your door. And you might have people come to you asking for help, trying to figure out what to do. And while it's great to ask, and this whole video is encouraging you to ask and hear the stories, like Mr. Douglas said, there is a line that we need to draw as Black teachers. There's a line that Black teachers need to draw to illustrate and communicate what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Yes, it's important to advocate for Black students, and it's important to get perspective. If you are a teacher working with a Black student, I encourage you to get perspective. But be aware how you ask for that perspective, be aware how you approach that. It's important, especially for Black teachers, because teachers are stressed right now. It's a not a hidden fact, not a secret fact. Teachers are very stressed and they need help, but it's not going to help anyone if we're overworking the teachers who are in the lowest minority. So we need to understand that, yes, these Black teachers are there to support the students, and sometimes you might need to lean on them a little bit. That being said, it should not always be the same Black teachers you're leaning on. It should not always be the same people you're leaning on, regardless of race, regardless of sex, regardless of gender, whatever it is. You as a teacher, teachers in general, aspiring teachers, current teachers, whatever it is, need to work hard to educate themselves and do the extra steps so that they're not being a burden, leaning on their other teachers who might relate to students a little bit more. It is a benefit to have a Black teacher in the classroom. It is a great benefit to have a Black teacher in a school on several different senses, one being the student side and also from the administrative side to get that perspective. However, they're a teacher at the end of the day. They already have so much burden, and there's no need to put too much on them. But that's just a kind of a point of a larger issue, and that issue is, what is the best route for Black teachers and Black students to take? The whole purpose of this video and one of the key questions is looking at how education exists right now. Is the public route the best route, or is the private route the best route, or is it charter, or is it something completely different? What is the best way for a student to get the proper education? And obviously the way I'm addressing this question is by looking at how the teachers perceive it. How are the teachers and the educators right now what their thoughts are. So this next section, we're going to take a few minutes and just hear from teachers, hear from these educators, hear from people I had an opportunity to speak with about what the best path looks like for teachers. And I asked them what the best path looks like for teachers because at the end of the day, if your teacher isn't happy where they are, they won't be as successful with their students. So I want to understand what the perspective is of teachers who are in the field and get an idea of what it might look like to be in the field and what it might look like in the future with how we're existing right now.
So seeing all that, what is your kind of personal opinion or thoughts on what the best route is for either a Black educator or an aspiring Black educator like myself to take?
So what I would say, I've always shared, and just shared this most recently, I was pushing in a leadership panel. And I would say when it comes to employment or professional opportunities, the most important thing is to make sure that you as an individual, you are familiar with whatever you value. What are your core beliefs? What are your core values as a person? And when considering employment opportunity, it's really important to make sure that you are moving into a values-aligned organization. So whatever you value, let's make sure that whatever the organization, the institution values, like there's synergy between the two, because there's nothing worse, so it's not about a job, it's about making sure you find the job that's the right fit for you. And as far as like platform, like what could that look like? I mean, there's just so much variation. At the end of the day, I'm about quality seats. I'm about making sure that every kid has the best opportunity possible to be the best version of their academic self.
Then the demographics of the specific city that they live in, the demographics of even the specific neighborhood that they're wanting to work in, of where their biggest impacts will be. And even private schools, I think that a lot of times as educators, we feel like we want to pull ourselves away from the private schools. But I think even in those spaces, it's also important for those students who are more affluent to also see that you can be an affluent Black academic.
As I was doing these interviews, it became clear to me that one of the most consistent things that came up was representation. I've talked about it in every single section of this video, and it's clear that representation is one of the keys to providing a solid education. Now, as it relates to the direction that Black teachers should go in regards to their future and their careers, as you saw it, there's no true answer. There's never a true answer in which way they should go, and that it makes this video a little bit harder for me, but it shows off a lot of growth and a lot of things to look forward to in the greater education space. Before I kind of wrap things up and talk about some of the findings and conclusions that I gathered from these interviews and from the other research I did, I think it's important to touch on an issue in education that affects all teachers, Black teachers included, and that's the fact of teachers just leaving the classroom.
So talk about that.
Specifically, I'm talking about how with Coach Erica had an opportunity to leave her education space. She is no longer a classroom teacher. She still works in education, don't get me wrong, but she's not necessarily in that academic space. So I asked Coach Erica kind of why, and she gave me a really interesting response, and I wanted to share that in this video before we wrap things up.
So talk about that. So when you were kind of going out of education, because that's the big thing in education right now, teachers leaving for several different reasons. So were your reasons kind of similar to everyone else's, or was it more so like centered around just your experiences as a Black teacher in the classroom?
Yeah, I think that I would say that I kind of have a similar, I would say it's half similar and then half maybe unique, maybe not. The first reason of course, pay equity. To be a professional that has a master's degree, if you're a teacher in a classroom, you're just not going to be getting paid what another professional that has a master's degree in a different area would be paid. And so that's always a thing that I think is on a lot of educators' mind. The second part for me was that I really take education, anytime I'm learning something, I always take it very seriously. And so something that bothered me was when I was in the classroom, I would be asked to do things that were not in alignment with what I was learning was best practice. And so that really bothered me. And I felt like I was a disservice to those students at times rather than being completely of service to them.
So it's clear that looking at everything we've kind of gathered today and taking a look at the future of education is interesting. It's bright because we have some amazing teachers currently in the field and some amazing people who are looking to get into the field. However, it's going to require a lot of work to make sure that education is equitable, equal, and fair for everyone. I think everyone realizes this, and it's important that we listen to the stories and understand why teachers are leaving. But beyond why teachers are leaving, we need to understand how they got in the field in the first place and what they've done while in the field to support students. When making this video, I made a strong effort to target Black teachers and speak on Black students and Black student experiences. I did this because as a Black man, growing up in my own educational experience, like everyone else said, I didn't have that many Black teachers. And fortunately, I was able to go to some very nice schools because my mother made sure that we had the best schools that we could possibly get to. But on the other side of things, I'm kind of losing where I'm going here. Listening to Coach Erica, I can't help but realize that the reasons teachers are leaving are mainly the same. And this video is not a video about that. If you wanted a video as to why teachers are leaving, I can sum it up real quick. Money. Students are not. Stop. Listening. Listening to Coach Erica, I can't help but realize that the reasons teachers are leaving the classroom are not all that different as you look at race and everything else. Most teachers are leaving for the same amount of reasons, financial reasons, classroom reasons, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's not what this video is about. If you wanted a solution to teachers leaving, I could make a video and we'll see how that goes. But specifically, this video is about how to support Black students through the lens of Black teachers. And after talking about how teachers got into education, how teachers left education, how these educators support their students, and then what the best route is, I found that there's no easy solution and no easy answer to the question of what is the best route for Black teachers and Black students to take. At the end of the day, a lot of it is circumstantial. Not everyone is in Arizona where there's no restrictions to what school you have to go to. Some people are in situations where they have to go to a certain school and there's no other option. Of course, they could maybe send their kid to a private school, but the student could attend a private school. But that's not the financial means of everyone. And if there's not a Black charter or a charter period in the area, then you're in the same situation and you would just be back at a public school. So it's easy to say that public schools is the best route for Black teachers to go to. I think that if you look at it numerically, there's just more Black students at public schools. There's more students at public schools and they need more help. However, that doesn't mean that that's the only way teachers should go. I'm going to get into a final closing video here from Dr. Boyce where he sums it up a lot better than I can, but more or less he says that students are students and they need help. And it's our responsibility as educators, Black or not, to provide them that help. And if I were to provide a solution to the education of Black students and the treatment of Black students in education, I would simply say that every teacher, every aspiring teacher especially, because we're the future, needs to take time, it needs to pay attention in class, it needs to commit to bettering themselves, improving their understanding, and taking active, proactive steps to learn about other cultures, to learn about other communities. Because in your classroom, you're going to get a lot of different communities. You could get communities from across the world, you can get communities from down the street. But you need to take time to understand these communities and understand the habits and the cultures and everything that goes on with them so that you can be a better teacher. It's very easy to say that the solution is representation and we need more Black teachers. I've been trying to find Black teachers and employ them every single day on campus, but it's not proving to be the most successful. Nonetheless, we have a current teaching force right now. And in this current teaching force, we need to stress the importance of understanding. And students, we need to take it seriously. As I close, I'm going to play this last little video from Dr. Boyce, and then we'll come back in for some last thoughts.
And so I think it's really important as a burgeoning professional to understand that good work can happen anywhere. So it's more important to understand and figure out what you value and then finding that opportunity that aligns with your values. For me, although I went through Catholic school my entire life, the only reason why I did was because the neighborhood option wasn't great. And part of me becoming an educator was every neighborhood option should be great. Like no parent should have to work multiple jobs to send their kid to a private school because the neighborhood option isn't great, which is why I wanted to dedicate myself to public school work, because I wanted to make sure that in the communities I serve, which is more often than not communities of color, communities that navigate poverty, the neighborhood options were exceptional and not a last resort. So As a burgeoning professional, my affinity is for public schools, but at the end of the day, there are kids in every school. So finding a place where you're aligned when it comes to values puts you in the best position to be the most successful, which means with that, you can change more lives.
And that's what it's about, changing lives. As educators, we have a long road ahead of us. There's nothing about it that sounds easy, except for the fact that we get summers off. As I close, I want to emphasize the fact that it is the responsibility of teachers currently studying, aspiring teachers. It is the responsibility of aspiring teachers to dedicate themselves to understanding every single student who comes in their classroom. This is very easy to say, but it's all about action. So I encourage you, every single person watching this video, whenever you watch it, to listen, ask questions, and talk to students, talk to other teachers, and talk to other people about their communities, their culture, and where they come from. And take notes, write things down, record it if you have to. But listen to it, understand it, and do everything you can to understand your students as well. This next generations of teachers is going to change the world, without a doubt. I say that. But in order to do it, we need to be intentional and we need to be proactive. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for listening. Like and comment, subscribe, and all that. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you.